at 1:33. And we have an agenda item, and that is 5E. It's discussion and possible action, including board direction to staff regarding potential amendment to Chapter 18.23 of the Mendocino Code, Class K Ordinance, to remove the square footage maximum restrictions for limited density rural dwellings. Planning and Building Services sponsor, but I want to ask the clerk, we did get some correspondence. I forgot to look to see if it's been recorded or not.
Yes,
Any correspondence has been attached to the item.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Schultz, you're the sponsor. Will you please introduce the item?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Brent Schultz, Planning and Building Services Director. And I've also got Mike Oliphant here, our building official. And I'm bringing you forward something that's dear to my heart, and that's people getting housing, and so desperately needed today. As I discussed in my staff report, Section 18.23.250 limits the square footage of limited density rural dwellings, our Class K ordinance, to 2,000 square feet. And I'm asking for that limitation to be removed from the order, for you to direct us to work with County Council and remove that. Since the original ordinance was adopted in '81 for Class K structures, the housing crisis really over time has, it's ebbed and flowed, but it's just gotten worse and worse. Nobody in the state is meeting their numbers, and that's, being from Southern California, nobody down there is, and I used to watch up this way, and everybody's having difficulty meeting that. Anything the county can do to remove barriers to housing construction would be welcome news to those wanting to build homes in the county for themselves and their families. And as you know, our PBS staff and our consultant team are finishing up the draft housing element for the 2019-2027 8-year cycle. And a critical component to that effort is staff recommending removal of impediments to housing production. And it's my opinion that this 2,000 square foot limit to the size of these Class K structures is limiting the production of new housing in the county. And while helping our residents, really it's our ultimate goal to get them housed. I think one thing that the board, and I know you know this, each additional home that we build in the county has a positive economic benefit, including local purchase of lumber, roofing materials, siding, concrete, electrical, hiring labor for that, hiring professionals to help with that design. But it also benefits the county in additional property tax. Every one of these projects generates property tax for a long time. And so it's a win-win all the way around. And our recommended action is that the board provides direction to staff to amend Chapter 18.23.250 of the Mendocino County Code, more commonly known as Class K Ordinance, and remove the square foot at maximum building size restriction for limited density rural dwellings. And that concludes my presentation. Mike and I are here to answer any questions on Class K structures, and I look to your direction.
Okay, supervisors, comments, statements. Supervisor Haschak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. First question is, how many permits or requests is this affecting? How many people are coming forward saying, I want to build a 2,000 plus square foot house using Class K?
I've had several since I've been here. I've been here about a year who have stopped because of the 2,000 foot limit.
And what do you think is the difference? What are they perceiving as the difference between Class K construction and regular permit?
The ones I've run into, some of them were like log cabin type structures. It wasn't a traditional California Building Code kind of structured site. It needed a little more creative analysis on the structure, and it was larger than the 2,000 square feet. I imagine they have bigger families. They might have in-laws with them, like where I'm headed. I probably need a bigger place soon. Sounds like my wife was saying. So I don't know. But I'm hearing, need for more room, additional family members, in-laws that need to stay with them, that type of thing.
And what would be the benefit of having it regular permitted? Is there safety issues that you see as far as the difference between the two? between a Class K and a regular
You know,
permit?
I can, Mike Oliphant knows all of the details between the California Building Code and the Class K structure. He could walk you through the differences if that would help you.
I think that is what supervisor's asking for, so please go forward.
Members of the board, Mike Oliphant. And so, Supervisor, to answer your question, Class K, or the name of it is the Limited Density Rural Dwellings. It sits in Title 25 of state law, whereas the California Residential Code and the California Building Code sits in Title 24 of state law. So Title 25 of state law also regulates mobile homes, modular homes, and this Class K limited density rural dwellings. It's somewhat relaxed. So somebody would use the Class K ordinance if they were going to use alternative materials and methods of construction, such as ungraded lumber or unusual, unconventional construction methods. They could go with the Class K construction. Now, the reasons people are opting to go Class K, quite frankly, number one is to get out of the fire sprinkler requirement that's required in the California Residential Code in the Title 24 state law. Now, we had the opinion from the state fire marshal, and in Title 25, it does not require fire sprinklers in those residences, so it's not required. However, they are required to adhere to the wildland urban interface requirements. Those are the exterior siding and roofing requirements that protect it from wildfire. The fire sprinklers are designed to protect the people who are inside the home. That's the only reason for the fire sprinklers. And yeah, there's an extra cost to that. And I think people oftentimes have the misconception that their house is going to get flooded when in reality only one sprinkler head goes off at a time. But it's a change. This sprinkler ordinance is rather new. It's only been in effect for a few code cycles now. So people are getting used to it. Nevertheless, they are exempt from fire sprinklers in the Class K ordinance. And I think that's one of the main reasons they would use a Class K.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Williams?
Yeah, I think the housing crisis is well acknowledged, and it's largely due to the result of too much regulation and government interference. So here I see we have two building officials, planning and building, not expressing any concerns about removing the square footage limitation. We know we need more living space. To have local government telling a rancher that they can't use their own milled lumber if they're building a house over a certain size. We know that lumber is probably better quality than they can buy at a building supply store, right? It's pride of ownership. They're milling it themselves. They care about it. I'm very supportive of this. And I've heard a few potential applicants discovering, they were planning on building and they discovered this block, and now they're into the conventional, which will drive up costs and add the sprinklers, or they have to reduce the size of their plans. I don't think we need to be interfering here, especially since planning and building is telling us they support the change.
I think there's a long story behind that. Supervisor McCallum?
Well, there is a lot of story behind it, and as most of us know, we revisited Class K not too long ago and updated it. For one thing, to put us in compliance with state law, which for about 20 years we hadn't been, and I'm still worried about the liability that may ensue from that. The 2,000 square foot was actually a compromise between members of the board who wanted 1,500, others who advocated for 2,500. 2,000 was a compromise. Now we're talking about throwing it out the window altogether. And it kind of stands the purpose of Class K on its head, which originally it was intended for the owner builder to cost effectively build a basic structure using alternative materials potentially, but it really wasn't foreseen as this is how I build my 5,000 or even 10,000 square foot conventional stick-built home, and I do believe it's been used for that purpose by some people before we adopted the revision with a size limit. But I really don't accept the premise that this is a barrier, that someone who can afford to buy a 2,000 square foot home can't go forward if they have to go by the conventional building code. The actual differences are, I believe, pretty minimal in terms of requirements. And I also thought, and maybe I'm mistaken on this, I thought that in the revised ordinance, we did have some condition related to sprinklers that beyond a certain size, you might still have to have them.
Members of the board, Mike Oliphant, no, that was discussed during the ad hoc meetings, but that was not adopted into the ordinance.
Because I'm really concerned about that when we go to an even larger structure where potentially you have even more people in the structure. Fire starts at one end of the building. People at the other end don't become aware until the building's fully engulfed. The fact of fire sprinklers is they save lives. They don't do anything to protect the house from a wildland fire. That isn't their purpose, as you state. They're incredibly effective at saving lives for fires that start within the structure. So I really think it's a poor trade-off in terms of health and safety to exempt large residential dwellings, potentially unlimited size, from any sprinkler requirement. So I wonder if, looking at this, is there some upper limit that people would say, gee, it's reasonable that that building be sprinkled?
Supervisor Williams.
Do we have any data to support a safety concern at any size? Until recently, we didn't have a limit on the size. Did we disproportionately register more fires or more fatalities from fires in those Class K structures that were oversized? And I'll note I've been to a lot of structure fires in commercial buildings, that inns and lodging establishments that have been well inspected. I would say more so than owner-builder construction, some of which is unpermitted. There's something about the owners living in the house that they tend to care about protecting it. Can you comment on the data? Is there data to support a size limitation?
Yes, members of the board, Mike Oliphant, we invited the state fire marshal to speak to the board, and he stated that since fire sprinklers were implemented into California State Code for all new residences, there had not been one fatality in a home that had a fire with fire sprinklers in it. And so it's rather compelling. But there was not previously a square footage cap in place, and so there wasn't a square footage factor involved in that.
If I may, one follow-up.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not clear on how the size of the house would impact the need for sprinklers. It seems like you could have a structure fire in a 1,000 square foot cottage without sprinklers and have a similar risk as being in a 5,000 square foot house without sprinklers, right? It's not a good day if you have a structure fire and you're inside. How does the size of the structure play in?
You are correct. The way it plays in is we have more occupants in we could possibly have more occupants in a larger structure.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you. And again, the original intent was the owner-builder, basic structure, low cost. It wasn't intended to build substantial dwellings that could have several family units. Potentially, you get a 10,000 square foot structure. It's really kind of, even though it's cost effective, I mean, people are betting their lives. And I do recall the statistic provided by the state fire marshal, not one fatality within a sprinklered structure. That's pretty compelling. So maybe a compromise to the previous compromise, which put us at 2,000 square feet. Maybe, and you know, I agree with you on one point, size doesn't matter. If we wanted to save lives, they would all be sprinkled. But if we want to preserve the option for relatively low cost construction, we would not require sprinklers on the smaller size Class K, But above a certain limit, I just think we're really being irresponsible to take any sprinkler requirement off. And then it becomes an equity issue. Why don't we just say everybody do Class K, forget the Uniform Building Code? I see a nod of
Second.
assent.
Okay. So, no more questions, statements by the board. We'll go to public comment. Mr. Ward?
Hello again, Scott Ward, Redwood Valley. I was remiss in also program. I want to acknowledge him as well. Class K, when I came to work for Mendocino County as an inspector, it was 1988. We were just rolling up a program called Clean Slate. Class K was in its teen years, about 7 years involved. I've inspected hundreds of Class K buildings. It's an option that needs to be part of the Mendocino County fabric. Class K construction is a lot cheaper than the California Building Code because there are many requirements of the California Building Code that do not move over to Title 25. For instance, Class K does not require a soils report.
A what report?
A soils report.
Soils.
The California Building Code does. A soils report can be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. Class K does not require engineering, so you can use imaginative construction, use lumber, site-graded lumber. Engineering on a standard 2,000 square foot house, $5,000 to $10,000. So you're at $10,000 to $20,000 right there. No fire sprinklers. Fire sprinklers are helpful. I won't disagree that. As a building official in Hillsburg, we require them in a lot of the older buildings by local ordinance. But those fire code requirements are not only driven by the disasters, also driven by insurance companies that don't want to pay out damages. And many, many, many states in this union do not have fire sprinkler mandates. You don't have to do Title 24 energy. You don't have to do the Energy Commission requirements with Class K. Those add quite a bit of expense for the builder. You don't have to do the California Green Building Code requirements, which is another layer of bureaucracy and documentation that's not needed in Class K. It's you use building materials, site milled lumber, imaginative construction methods, personal pride and ownership. I raised 4 kids in a 1,200 square foot house. It was tough. Guess what? They're boomeranging back because they can't afford housing in Mendocino County. I wish I had a bigger house to house my early 20-year-olds that are back. They're working full-time. They're productive citizens. At $20 an hour, they can't afford to rent in this town. If they could afford to rent, it's some schlock down in Laws Avenue, and it's just nasty and crime-ridden. We're getting older. Like Brent, I'm getting older. My folks may come live with me. I may go live with my kids. So increasing the size makes sense. It's not a detriment to the community. It's a benefit to our citizens. And I think you should support Director Schultz's request. Thank you.
Mr. Seltzer?
Good afternoon now, and thank you for the opportunity. Most of
State your name for the record,
I'm sorry,
sir.
Richard Seltzer, Mendocino County resident. I want to address mainly the housing shortage that we're all facing. As was just pointed out, he's got 20-something-year-olds that are boomeranging back. I've got 4 that live with me that are 22 to 27. The reason they live with me is because they can't afford housing. This is just one more of the things that would be opportunity to reduce the cost of housing in our community. And it doesn't benefit just the people who are able to build Class K. By building a Class K house, they come out of the market for buying one that's already in existence, which means there's one more house that's otherwise not going to be available if they buy it. And I don't recall who pointed it out, but somebody mentioned that the cost of building today is largely driven by regulation, whether it's the Green Code, whether it's Class K versus conventional building permit, whether it's thermal pane windows, whether it's sprinklers or anything else. Most of the cost, or much of the cost, is driven by regulation. And as far as sprinklers are concerned, if it's that big a deal, maybe you should require them to be retrofitted to all residences in the county. You would then see a very different group of people here talking to you about whether or not sprinklers are worthwhile. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
As a realtor, Class K, what does a potential buyer say?
It's an issue, needs to be disclosed, obviously. The biggest issue that we face is whether or not that's going to be an impediment to financing. Most people don't care that it's a Class K. Perhaps if they know it's a Class K, they may do some additional inspections, but most of their concern is going to be around the financing of it.
And financiers are okay with Class K?
Some are, some are not. It does limit the choices,
Okay.
but it doesn't, it does not eliminate the choices.
And of course, if someone builds their home, I'm not expecting them to turn around and sell it right away. But that was in the past, and I thank you very much. But that was in the past, part of the discussion that we had on Class K and the size, square footage. So, anyway, thank you, Dick.
Thank you.
Anyone else, public comment on this item? Seeing no one come forward, it's back to the board. Yeah, we did, just for Supervisor Williams and Supervisor Haschek, we did have quite a debate. We had an ad hoc that was working on this particular issue. We also had different constituents that came forward and talked about CEQA and how much square footage could be with a Class K without us having to go through CEQA. So I don't know if Supervisor McCowan or Jurdy remember more, but it was quite a debate back in the time that the square footage was set. So Supervisor Williams.
I appreciate Supervisor McCowan's comments. I'm here mulling over the larger structure, more occupants, that I'd sure like them to have sprinklers. But I also know that it's important to get people into housing. We have a shortage, and if we just keep creeping in the direction of safety, we have people not in housing, which is also not safe. So I would move the recommended action.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Supervisor Jurdy?
I was not on the ad hoc that worked on this, so
Neither was I.
So I don't have all the background that, I don't know, Supervisor McCowan, were you probably on the ad hoc?
Yes.
I
And
was with
Supervisor
Supervisor
Hamburg.
Okay. I mean, I'm open to making some changes to this, but just one point I wanted to bring out is that I think that the number one obstacle in people building housing is actually getting construction loans approved. You know, it's not easy to get a construction loan. It's much easier, people may not know this, it's much easier to get a conventional mortgage than a construction loan. My guess is that most people who've built under Class K have not gone to a conventional bank to get financing. We have a lot of people in Mendocino County, historically anyway, who have lived off of cash income and unreported income, and may well have self-financed their Class K house, or may be equity refugees from the Bay Area or someplace and had the cash to go build a house. But having said that, so I'm open to the idea of raising the cap on the Class K, but maybe having a lower cap that would say at some point you do have to have sprinklers. I do recognize that sprinklers are an added cost. The latest information I have is they're basically $6 to $8 a square foot. You know, that's not insignificant. And some of the other costs that were mentioned, such as the energy calculations, which I think are important. I think you could, if someone was conscious, they would want to incorporate energy efficiency into their house, whether they had the studies or not. But they add maybe $1,000 or $1,500 to the cost of a house construction. I think the bigger cost savings that may be warranted would be the lack of a soils analysis. I think in most cases people don't really need that. And also, you know, there's pros and cons to having the engineering. And I've heard it could be more than $10,000 for engineering on a house. So anyway, so I'm open to if we want to make some changes to it, but I think I'm more inclined to go with the direction that Supervisor McCowan mentioned, which is if we raise the total square foot on a Class K, at some point say it still has to have sprinklers, because it's not an entirely low budget project at that point, even if it is owner built. And then finally, as I understand the code, we've limited it to 2,000 square feet for the Class K structure. And the code also allows that if you have a building on your property that was not required to have fire sprinklers, you can build a second unit without sprinklers. So you know, in terms of square footage, you're still going to allow another up to 1,200 square foot second unit and a junior accessory dwelling unit of up to 500 square feet. So I'm just saying there could be a fair amount of housing on that property besides the Class K house itself. So I don't know if others have thoughts on how, if we were to change the ordinance, how we would change it other than just eliminating the cap altogether.
And I would like to ask of staff, in the coastal zone, is Class K permitted?
Members of the board, Mike Oliphant. In the coastal zone, Class K is permitted, yes.
But coming in for a Class K permit, we would still have to go through the same process?
That's
With-
correct.
okay.
You would go through
With a
the
coastal
same,
development permit?
that's correct, yeah. It wouldn't affect the planning portion or the development permit at all.
Thank you. Supervisor Williams?
I'll try again. I move we provide direction to staff regarding an amendment to Chapter 18.23 of the Mendocino County Code, more commonly known as the Class K Ordinance, to remove the square foot maximum restriction for limited density rural dwellings with sprinklers.
So
Supervisor Haschek?
well, second
So-
for discussion.
Okay, so just to clarify, you would require sprinklers on any construction over 2,000?
Correct.
Okay, Supervisor McCowan?
And I'll note for the record, too, we did receive correspondence from Alan Levine, which he unfortunately did not send it to the clerk of the board, which is why it is not posted.
Okay.
And maybe I will forward it to clerk of the board now, but he does raise that potentially there is a CEQA issue, and I'm not qualified to support that or to verify that, but I'm sure that any changes we make to the housing element will go through environmental review. So potentially, I guess if this would lead to dramatically more building, potentially there's environmental issues that have to be reviewed. I think I can support this change. I am a little concerned that some of the other things that go out the window are green building and energy.
Efficiency.
Pardon?
Green energy?
Green building and energy calculations.
building,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I was trying to think,
Well,
too.
green energy could be part of the energy calculations, but it's nice to think that people would do what is in their long-term economic best interest as well as the environment. It doesn't always happen that way, but at least in terms of giving direction to have something come back as part of the housing element, that's why I seconded the motion. I can support that.
Supervisor Haschek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I totally support the Class K concept, and I think that, you know, these issues of the safety of the people in the house, the green building, the energy efficiency studies, those kind of things are good, and we should be promoting those. And so I guess I'm undecided right now about what the best path forward, because I do think the Class K was meant for people to provide some affordable housing. But when you get over 2,000 square feet, that's major construction. You know, it's a big home, and like Supervisor Jurdy said, if you can do an alternate dwelling or the second dwelling unit, then that can solve a lot of problems too. So I'm kind of torn on the whole issue.
I'm also. Supervisor Williams?
These are all great ideas. I want to see all of it happen, but realistically, wages are too low or the cost of building is too high. There's this spread, and it's stopping development. And so as much as I'm in favor of energy efficiency and green building and safety and everything else, if we set the bar so high that we don't see development, we're leaving people out on the street. And as far as the size, if you have a multi-generational family trying to live in one dwelling, 2,000 square feet is tight. And I think that's a model we do want to support unless we can find some rational basis against it. Okay, I would like to ask the planning director if he knows our growth rate. Are we seeing a 1 or 2% increase in dwellings in this county annually?
I thought I saw from the PlaceWorks analysis, like it's trending positively 1 to 2% a year.
Yeah,
over the
1 to
next 8
2%.
years.
So if we don't shift course, finding a way to boost wages in this county or bring the cost of building down at that rate, this problem will just compound. We don't have enough housing for our people at today.
Supervisor McCowan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the key benefits of Class K is the ability for alternative design, alternative materials not otherwise allowed. So that's one of the things that is encouraging me to go forward with this. I do think we're radically changing the intended original purpose of Class K. I'm willing to go along because we are still requiring sprinklers for the larger structures, and it's very well documented that that's a dramatic life-saving measure. And it also, by extinguishing the fire that starts inside someone's house, you're preventing that whole structure from becoming engulfed and spreading to the neighbors. And as we know, in rural areas where the fire department may be a half hour, 45 minutes or longer, if you don't have that immediate fire suppression, it goes from it's one structure on fire to spreading to the neighbors potentially. So.
Okay, I'd like to hear the motion again, please.
Do you want me to read it?
The motion was provide direction to staff regarding an amendment to Chapter 18.23 of the Mendocino County Code, more commonly known as the Class K Ordinance, to remove the square foot maximum restriction for limited density rural dwellings with sprinklers.
Well,
Okay,
remove
so
the maximum square footage, however, requiring sprinklers for above 2,000.
Oh, I think it's the
That's
same
my
effect
question.
as what she read.
Um,
We're removing the square foot maximum restriction for limited density rural dwellings with sprinklers. So we would be keeping the square footage limitation for dwellings without sprinklers.
Okay.
So Supervisor Williams made the motion. Supervisor McCowan, you're the second. You
Correct.
agree to the amendment?
With the clarification that it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
I don't think that's in the motion.
I'm sorry, can I just get clarification, please? So now I have provide
Well-
direction to staff regarding an amendment to Chapter 18.23 of the Mendocino County Code, more commonly known as the Class K Ordinance, and that's the end of the motion?
No,
he just
it's the
added that
original
in.
motion and just append with sprinklers.
Thank you.
Over 2,000 square feet.
You don't need to
She
add,
didn't, she didn't have that.
Got it, thank you.
Well, I think we all understand the intent of
Yeah.
the motion. If someone not here for the discussion read that, the staff think they would, well, staff is going to plug it in. This isn't final language. It'll come back in the housing element. Yeah,
may I ask
I
one?
think we're good.
Supervisor Haschak.
I'm uncomfortable with just leaving it open-ended for no upper limit. So I would like to add an amendment to that motion to put a cap of 2,500 square feet on it.
I don't want to accept that amendment for now. I would consider it if we could bring back some data to show that structures over 2,500 square feet are a safety risk. You know, if we're seeing injuries or
Well-
fatalities. But to just do it arbitrarily against staff's recommendation, would rather not. And May I?
Sure.
So, question for staff. Are we meeting our housing element today?
No.
So that's really the basis here, that we can't be putting any more restrictions in place. We have a legal mandate to meet our housing element, and we're falling short. Anything we can do to drive more housing is a win. People in their cars are not safe. They need to be in structures. And so if we set that bar so high that they can't get into a structure, we don't see construction, we're not making anyone safe.
Well, I just have to put in the point that anyone building over a 2,000 square foot home is probably not living in their automobile. Sorry.
Thank you.
My last comment, but they may not be. They have the funds to build the house, but by moving out of the rental they're in today, you're freeing it up for somebody else who may be living in a car. And so what we need to look at is the total number of units relative to the total demand. And I know we have people living in vehicles. I mean, I tried to push somebody along who's living in an RV in a high school parking lot, and she said, "I'm sorry, I'm a nurse working at a local clinic. I can't find housing." There's real people who are productive members of our community.
I understand.
Yeah, and so I see this as a push in the right direction.
Okay. Any more comment? We will vote by the button. And I might say this will come back to be vetted again.
The motion carries with Supervisor Hashtag dissenting.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since staff is testing the waters on the board's position on barriers to housing, staff might come back and ask us what we think about the inclusionary housing ordinance, which I think some people believe is a dramatic barrier to housing. And wouldn't you want some pre-direction on that issue before you go writing your housing element?
That would probably be a good idea.
Madam Chair, yes, I would love to hear any of your comments on our housing element and ways to change inclusionary housing ordinances. They, as you know, you've heard my comments on them before. They can definitely hinder production of new housing if they're not developed right.
So at the direction of the board, inclusionary housing ordinance
Agenda item?
should be an agenda item that comes back.
Well, we are gonna, when the housing element comes to you, it's going to have recommended other impediments that we're looking at that we want the board to consider. So, and that will be one of the areas I'll be touching on, and with affirmative recommendations on what to do and see what the board thinks of that.
So what's a timeline for that?
We have to have that done and into the HCD by December, I think it's 13th or 15th, so it'll be on a meeting before that. I thought we were shooting for an early meeting in December or late November to bring that to you, where the clock is ticking down and we're hustling to get that to you.
Okay, Supervisor McCowan?
Well, it begs the question why this one barrier that affects arguably a limited number of structures is a separate agenda item, and inclusionary housing ordinance would not be, which potentially affects the great majority of units that might be constructed.
Second.
Would you like me to answer that?
Sure.
Brent Schultz, Planning and Building Services Director. That was another life. All these titles running around in my head. I'm not ready to recommend to you on the inclusionary housing program. That's why I've not brought it yet. I'm working with PlaceWorks on recommendations on that. They're not done with their analysis, and I will have a recommendation to you. We've got to get that done quickly, and that is an impediment to housing production in our county.
Okay. We've concluded that agenda item. Thank you, gentlemen.